Hello students, welcome to today's government live class. We've over time been looking at the various concepts of government that exist in the past and down to the modern age. We have looked at varying concepts that are largely democratic in nature and the ones that are not so democratic in nature. Today we'll be rounding up the elements of government, looking at four major concepts today. We're going to be looking at totalitarianism, Nazism, oligarchy, aristocracy, and then the forms of aristocratic government. So we'll be starting with the first one, which is totalitarianism. Totalitarianism. From the word totalitarianism, we see that we can derive total. So what do we talk about when we're looking at totalitarianism? Totalitarianism is a form of government in which the state has absolute, total control over everything, including all aspects of the citizen's life. That is why we said the key word in totalitarianism is total. Here, the government has absolute control over everything within the state as well as the lives of the citizen. In this system of government or this form of government, we can say that the law is a product of the will of the rulers. That is, the rulers determine what is lawful and unlawful. In this system of government, the state or the leaders of the state or the rulers of the state define the standard on what is right and what is wrong. That's why we said a totalitarian system of government is one in which the government has absolute control over everything in it. Including the citizens' lives. It is important to note that the law is a product of the will of the rulers. Now, in your Jamb questions, you could be asked, which of the following is not a characteristic or feature of a totalitarian government? Thus, we must look at the features of totalitarianism. One, we have absence of constitution. Absence of constitution. That is the first thing you need to note about a totalitarian government. There is no limit to the powers of the rulers or the powers of the government. That is because there is no constitution that limits power. Remember previously, we looked at a concept called sovereignty, where we looked at the supreme power of the state to govern and control the individuals. So where a state possesses supremacy not in the law, but in a single individual or amongst the rulers, we can say that the firm is what, or the system is totalitarian. Another very important feature of totalitarianism is the fact that there is a dictatorship. There is a dictatorship. What we mean is that the states that practice totalitarianism are usually headed by a dictator. Remember, we said a dictator can be a person who believes that they have the right to rule and uses force to compel obedience. We are looking at the features of totalitarianism. We looked at the first one, which is the absence of the constitution. We said the powers of the government have no limitation because the constitution does not exist. Recall we said in this system of government, the law is a product of the will of the rulers. What we're simply saying is the law is defined by the people that rule the state. Meaning that there is no need for a preluded set of laws, rules, or regulation because the rulers at the time determine what the law should be. Also, in this system, as you would expect, there is no individual freedom or liberty. No individual freedom or liberty. As in any dictatorship, the rights of the people are completely neglected, as well as their opinions, their initiatives, and innovation. The activities of the people, including how they live their life, is controlled by the government. And in this system, it is said that the people are paid little or absolutely no attention to. Also, in this system, we have suppression. Suppression exists in this system. What do we mean by suppression? Here, the government utilizes force as a means to suppress the opposition or people, or to suppress those who wish to oppose their policies. Recall that in any dictatorship, there must be an opposition, either by people who attempt to bring down, disvalue, or demerit the policies of the particular government. Here, the government does anything within its power to suppress any such opposition to ensure that there is what? Total control over activities. Also, in this system, there is absolute control of the mass media. Absolute control of mass media. That is, the government has total control on what the press can publicize as news or as advertisements. This is a way in which the government limits the freedom of press, which is a power that is usually granted by the constitution of a democratic state. The freedom of press is a means by which the people can express their grievances as well as their opinions. However, in a totalitarian system of government, there is absolute control of the mass media by the government. Also, in this system, we can say that the economy is highly centralized. The economy is highly centralized. What we are trying to say is there is usually no delegation of power. Power is concentrated at the center where the dictators rule. And that is how information, policies, and control follows from the central point. An economy that is highly centralized means that the government and the state make most of the economic decisions and also make or take control over the means and factors of production, exchange, as well as distribution. When you highlight some of the features of a purely communist state, we can similarize that with what occurs in totalitarianism. As you would expect, this system would be largely characterized by terrorism and oppression. So we can say the system uses force to oppress and terrorize the people to subject themselves to the will of the leader. So here, the leader is completely supreme. Also, in a totalitarian system of government, they practice one-party system. They practice one-party system. One-party system is simply a form of political association in which only one political party is recognized by the state, and opposition exists illegally, right? So we're not saying that opposition does not exist, but we're simply saying that in a one-party system, the opposition is not allowed to exist. And that's where we talk about how the use of force in suppression is used to suppress opposition of any party. Also, in a totalitarian system of government, the government controls all means of information and education. Thus, we can say that there is a monopoly. There is a monopoly of access by the government to information and education. The government knows that educating its people will give them a basic knowledge of their fundamental rights, and that will lead to more resistance against the government. And that is why they usually have absolute control over the education and information that the people possess, to ensure that their opinions are restricted. Where they are not educated, they are forced to blindly follow the leadership of the people. So these are 9 core features of totalitarianism, and it is what helps us understand what form or system practices it. And a very realistic example of this system of government is in Germany. As of 1933, under the leadership of Adolf Hitler. Under the leadership of Adolf Hitler, we saw Germany become a highly totalitarian state in which there was no constitution. Adolf acted as a dictator who restricted the individual freedom and liberty of the citizen, suppressed opposition, had control over the mass media, ensured the economy was highly centralized, and used force to oppress and terrorize the people to be subject to his will as a leader. And no other party was allowed to exist at that time, and he had monopoly over the means of information and education. That is what we call a totalitarian system of government. Now we'll be looking at Nazism. Nazism. Cutting from the word Nazi, right? This is also a system of government that was practiced in Germany under Adolf Hitler as well. What was this system of government? It is a form of government in which the state has total control over the cultural, social, economic, and political activities of the people, with their fundamental rights being denied. Nazism exists as an extreme form of totalitarianism. We said in this system, the government has total control over the social, the cultural, and political activities of the people, with their fundamental rights denied. Like I said, this was an extreme form of totalitarianism. Here, the government had control over
the people to the extent of even denying them their fundamental rights in aspects of life, association, freedom of anything was totally limited. And I said this system was also practiced under Adolf's regime in Germany. Right? From a totalitarian system, we saw the movement to Nazism. Now, the major difference here is that the law is a product of the will of the leader.
So it then moves from being a group of rulers
governing the people, but rather the laws of the land being dictated by a single individual. Now, what were the features of this particular system of government? Features of Nazism. First one, it was completely totalitarian. Here, what are we trying to say? We're saying that the state controlled everything. The state controls everything. Right? In this system, there was also a philosophy of a particular
political party
known as the National Socialist Party. Here, so let's see, this system operated
under the philosophy of the National
Socialist
Party, NSP.
What was the ideology of this particular party? This party believed that individuals are simply a means to an end. They were instruments by which the state was able to realize their end goal, meaning that the state in itself was the end. And individuals, citizens, members of that state were only or simply a means to an end. Now, when you understand that people are a means to an end, you see how their fundamental rights can be alienated. This is because they are simply, any damage to their life could be seen as what? Collateral damage for the state to get to what they want. This system of government was completely against the rights of the people to live, to have association, and to possess dignity as individuals or as persons. Also, we saw total control over education, from the primary level all the way to tertiary institutions. They were under the control of the state. Also, associations, unions like trade unions and political parties other than the ruling party usually existed illegally or in the background. Recall when we were explaining the totalitarian system of government, we said opposition was not allowed. It didn't mean that they did not exist. However, they were not legally allowed to exist. Unlike here in Nigeria, where multiple political parties exist and have the right to what? Campaign to secure position in government. So here, other political parties, trade union, pressure groups, associations existed underground. So we can put that associations, trade unions, political parties, aside the ruling party, existed underground.
That is in the background, or
they existed illegally. Also, in this system, the economy, especially the agricultural sector, was regulated and placed under control. So there was total control over education and the economy. as a whole, including the
primary sector, which was
agriculture. Again, in this system, we had what we call a one-party state.
One-party state. Only one political party was legally recognized. And that is the NCP. Recall.
The NCP, whose philosophy they operated under, and as you would understand, that was the political party that Adolf Hitler himself was a member of. So only one political party was legally recognized, which was
the NCP, that is the National Socialist Party.
It was a one-party state. Also, they had what you call a Nazi economy.
A Nazi economy. Now, if you don't already know,
Nazis are one of the biggest racial communities that have existed in the world. They believed that their race was the purest and all other races remained inferior. They believed in the superiority of their race and believed that their race was the only pure race and that purity needed to be maintained. And that is why other races were inferior. In that time, outsiders or people from other races, aside Caucasians, that is white people, were usually alienated. They were disenfranchised, sometimes even to the extent of being killed. In those periods, Black people would run away from being sent as slaves because they were treated with the lowest form of dignity humans have ever seen. That is the system that the Nazi economy operated. That is
superiority and purity of their race. That was a very
big part of the Nazi system. Also, we saw full authority vested on the leader of the state. Powers were concentrated on the leader and his will became law. Remember, we said it here that the law is a product of the will of the leader. So,
there was full authority vested on the leader, and his will became law. Also, we had the concentration of power on the leader. So we can say that there was concentration beyond having full authority to rule the state. Beyond having full authority to rule the state, beyond having full authority to rule the state, there was concentration of power on the leader. Recall that right now, regardless of the fact that we have a president that rules us from the top, still you see governors having some level of political autonomy in their areas of jurisdiction. However, in a Nazi state, power was fully concentrated on the leader. In that time, Adolf Hitler. Here, everyone believed to be responsible to him, and his actions were always right and above criticism. That was a system of government that was operating in Germany at the time. Another very important feature in this system was the victimization of people. Victimization of people. In this system of government, all groups that did not consent to the leader, or those that were not willing to obey the leader, were compelled to do so by force or dumped in concentration camps. There, they were seen to be victims of the leadership's cruelty. There was much cruelty in this state because